Hello to my fellow history lovers. So I watched part two of the Ken Burns documentary last night, and I had kind of complicated thoughts about it. And I talked to my two sons who saw things differently, and I thought I would love to hear other people's thoughts. So here we go. When they were talking about Washington and Jefferson as slave owners, I felt honestly like a little bit of grief. And I think the grief is it's not the story I wish it was. But then as I thought more about it, I thought I think there's two stories going on here. So for Washington and Ben Franklin, I think they follow the traditional, writers call the hero's journey. So think Star Wars, Harry Potter, Percy Jackson. You start out as one person, but as you grow in your skill and your knowledge, you become a person who's able to live differently or do different things. I think Washington and Franklin fit that. So both start out as slave owners, but at the end of their life, Washington will free his slaves, technically after Martha dies. Uh, and Franklin will, who I didn't even realize was a slave owner, will become an ardent abolitionist. So their worlds change. And interestingly, Phyllis Wheatley, who was in one of my books, was this brilliant, brilliant woman, enslaved woman. So picture she's 7 years old and sold on a dock all alone, a little girl all alone, sold in Boston. And she's brilliant. She eventually can read Latin and Greek. And she sends a poem to Washington, who writes back and honors her poetry. And I thought that was her helping him keep expanding like his worldview. And I think both of those men, by the end of their lives, not only saw the world differently, but took different actions. So now I'm going to juxtapose that with Jefferson and Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry, remember, is the famous "Give me liberty or give me death." Both knew about the horrors of slavery. In fact, there was an abolitionist who called Patrick on it in a letter, and Patrick Henry wrote back and he said, "I will not, I cannot justify my own part in this." And he said in it that he knows it's inhumane, he knows there's cruelty, but he couldn't see a way out. Basically, he thought someday maybe the government could take care of this, but he was worried about economic collapse, he was worried about safety, and he couldn't sort of change his way in the world, so to speak. So Jefferson and Patrick Henry will live and die as slave owners. So then I was asking my son, well, is that like a flat line? Is that like not a hero's journey? And my son said, well, maybe what you do is you look at it as what did they contribute? And he said it's sort of like the Nobel Prize, the guy that started the Nobel Prize. I had never heard this. And this was just last night he was mentioning it, but apparently he was going to be called the Merchant of Death because he created dynamite, which was going to be used in warfare. And he didn't want that to be his story in life. So he created the Nobel Prize, which of course inspired millions of scientists. So I guess I just like your thoughts on that. And I don't know exactly what the question is, other than how do you see them all and are they different in their journeys? Thanks for letting me share. Part two will be later.